Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you for watching. In this video I want to say a few things about Confucianism. And in order to do so, I want to see if I can set the stage historically a bit and then turn to the life of Confucius. If time permits, I'll say a few things about his general philosophy. So, Confucius was born 551, died in 479. This puts him square in the time period known as the Zhou dynasty and what would become part of China later. Now, the Zhou dynasty is characterized by being a feudal monarchy, and it's claimed that there were a few hundred years that we can characterize as the golden era, but that golden era wouldn't last much longer than those few hundred years, because ultimately the Zhou dynasty would devolve into a kind of social anarchy. The Zhou dynasty, to situate it, it follows on the heels of what's known as the Shang dynasty, sometimes called the Yin dynasty. And that dynasty ended, it's claimed, because the final monarch, the final ruler, monarchy characterized the Shang dynasty, was too vicious, or was not virtuous enough to have the right to rule. So fundamentally, at the foundations, at the core of the foundations of the Zhou dynasty, was the idea that heaven, or Tian, mandates that those who have the right to rule must be virtuous, or they must have some kind of moral force when they behave. This is sometimes called te. So there's a heavenly mandate, a mandate of heaven is sometimes called. Tian is a term, the concept that, or the term that's used to refer to heaven. And it has it that in order to rule, one has to be virtuous, and the Zhou dynasty is supposed to have begun with very virtuous rulers, those who were justified and had the right to rule because of their virtue. And so the Zhou dynasty, as I said, it allegedly had a few hundred years where the rulers were properly virtuous, and the people were basically, the citizens were basically following their orders and living in line with the commands of the ruling class, but the ruling class was issuing orders which ultimately led to the happiness of the citizenry. So there was supposed to have been quite a bit of happiness during this time period. Again, sometimes referred to as a kind of a golden era. And certainly Confucius, when you look back at this time period, seems to think that this time period had this quality being like a golden era, an era where things were going well. But as I said, that this golden era wouldn't last long. I mean, it wouldn't be maybe a few hundred years as long, it lasted long, but it wouldn't last forever, because rebellion and warfare would ultimately prevail during Confucius's life. And what characterizes, broadly speaking, the political state that Confucius was aware of and lived through during his life, it's anarchy. So it's claimed that there may be there may well have been a monarch, but the monarch didn't have enough centralized power because there were other feudal lords and leaders, and they would fight among themselves for power, and they would fight for the sake of trying to gain the power during this time period in the Zhou dynasty. So this is what Confucius was brought into. He's brought into a world that was characterized by a lot of social anarchy, a lot of war and a lot of strife. And we're going to see that Confucianism, in part, and perhaps large part, emerges out of this chaotic scene. So let me see if I can say a few things about Confucius, about his life, to get um, that some give us some context into who he was as a man. Now, Confucius was born, as I said, 551, 479. That's when he died, before the current era. And he was born in what's known as the state of Lu. His father was a well-respected military man, and the legend has it that he had 12 daughters and had longed for a son. And finally, with a younger woman who he took as his wife later in his life, he ended up having Confucius. And sadly for Confucius, his father died when he was quite young, so he never really knew his father. And when that happened, the family, on the father's side, disowned Confucius and Confucius's mother. In part, it's claimed because the family recognized that it had 12 daughters to take care of, and all of them would need to be taken care of until and if they were to receive a family of their own, a husband of their own to care for them. So consider the time period here, historically. Now, this led to a lot of poverty and hard times for the young Confucius and the mother. The mother always recognized that Confucius had a great brain, a great mind on his shoulders, that instead of playing war games with his friends, things like that, playing games with his friends, he was creating games that were more in keeping with setting up the rituals from the ancient past that he seemed to have revered from a very young age. He must have been exposed to the ancient texts that describe the golden era that he so admired and revered during his lifetime. And so the legend has it that he was studying these classics and studying how it is that these ancient people during the Chu dynasty, the early part of the dynasty, how they had lived and carried themselves. These things might be legends, but still they're sometimes attributed to Confucius's life. So that gives us at least a little bit of a sense of like what his childhood was like. He had a rough childhood. He was impoverished. He was poor, but he was kind of serious and more interested in studying history than he was playing games. And his mother saw this, and she wanted him to gather and gain a great education. And she had high ambitions for him because she saw that he had a kind of natural intelligence and curiosity for things that most other children his age did not have. So he ended up landing a nice job for a time. So he was quite competent, quite intelligent, and so he ended up landing this job working for a granary. So granaries is where they store grain, and he ended up working for a granary, being in charge of the books there. Was a kind of an accountant-like figure, and this was the kind of job that he was willing to do. It ended up bringing in money for the family, and so that was good. But it really wasn't his ambition. It really wasn't what he wanted to be doing. But of course, to get a break like that was good for his family. Now, his happiness with his mother wouldn't last long. Sadly, she ended up passing away when he was pretty young, and so this was heartbreaking for him during the formative years of his early adult years. And so he decides after some time to begin pursuing what he really wants to pursue. And he had started to gain a kind of reputation for being someone with quite a bit of knowledge, very intelligent, and so he started tutoring and teaching. And he taught in a very Socratic manner by legend, by way of having conversations with individuals and students. as opposed to being like an autocratic kind of teacher. So he ended up gaining a reputation as being someone who was a good tutor and a good teacher. So this was more in line with what he wanted to do with his life, but it still wasn't quite what he wanted to do, because he really wanted to advise a ruler. He was happy having disciples around him who would listen to him, but he really wanted to be someone who advised a ruler, and if he could have students around him while he advised a ruler, that'd be the best case scenario. And so he ended up trying for that, but he didn't meet much success. He couldn't get rulers to hear him out, to even give him a chance. But one day he was given a chance. In his home state of Lu, he ended up finding a ruler who was interested in allowing him to advise him. And rumor has it, legend has it, that during this time period, the state of Lu was flourishing and doing very, very well. The citizenry was doing great. And this didn't last long, unfortunately, because the legend has it that the other local competitors, those who were competing for power with Lu, they knew how they could disrupt the current, or the flourishing situation that Confucius claims to have brought about in the state of Lu by sending a beautiful woman to the ruler that Confucius was advising. And sure enough, that beautiful woman seduced and ended up taking and consuming all of the ruler's attention, thus leaving Confucius out. And so Confucius ended up leaving. And after this time period, he wandered around. I should note that he did have a wife, and he did have a child with that wife, but his life mission really was to find a ruler to advise, to help eliminate the anarchic state that had emerged in the lands in which he was living in what would become a unified China. He lived in part of what would become later unified China. Now, he ended up wandering, trying to find someone, and didn't really have any luck. But after wandering for several years and having no luck, he wandered with students and disciples, and had many encounters with people who wanted to learn from him, for people who wanted to kill him because of the anarchic state that existed during that time period, for the ideas that he espoused. And so he ended up making his way back home, and the last 5 years of his life he spent back home in the state of Lu, and he died. So that gives us a sense of who Confucius the man was. As I said before, his main goal was to try to resolve the problem of social anarchy in the lands in which he was living. There were several solutions that were available during Confucius's lifetime. One such solution, for example, was what's known as the realist solution. Sometimes it's been dubbed the realist solution. And what this amounts to is that, look, people, when they act in an anarchic way, the ruling class needs to double down and use force to instill the proper order that's required. Another solution was that love is the way to correct the problem of anarchy. That is a kind of spreading of happiness. Make the citizens happy. And if you make the citizens happy, then you will end up eliminating this desire to live in such a lawless state. So those are two such answers. Confucius doesn't like either of them. And I'm going to stop here and pick up with this in my next video. Thanks for watching, everybody.